Hello everyone and welcome to lesson 14.2E. I've entitled this video Modern East Asia. This video is going to cover pages 445 to 447. Modern East Asia. After World War II, East Asia saw substantial changes in its governments and economies. Some of the region's countries developed into important economic powers. Modern China. After 1949, China became two Chinas. One was mainland China, ruled by the communists, and the other was the nationalist government on the island of Taiwan. In the 1950s, the communist mainland government took control of businesses and industry. It also took land and created state-owned farms. In the late 1950s, Mao Zedong introduced the Great Leap Forward. This program's goal was to increase China's industrial output. Many peasants left the fields and began working in factories. Cities grew rapidly. The program failed, however. Poor planning, natural disasters, and a drop in food production led to widespread famine. During China's Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s, intellectuals, such as doctors and teachers, were ordered to work on farms. Students also were taken from school and sent to the countryside to work. In this way, Mao hoped to get rid of any cultural elements that did not support his idea of communism. Question 1. What important war led to big changes in the governments and economies in East Asia? World War II. Number 2. What did the phrase two Chinas mean after 1949? Well, you had the mainland China, which is the biggest area, and that was ruled by the communists, and then you had that nationalist government flee to the island of Taiwan and set up their other, quote, China there. So that's how you have two Chinas. Question 3. How did the Chinese mainland government make huge changes in the 1950s? Well, they took control of businesses and industry, and they took the land and they created state-owned farms. And that's what you get under a communism system of government. Question 4. What was the main goal of Mao's Great Leap Forward program? He was trying to increase China's industrial output. He had seen how it had worked in other countries, like the more modern countries of the world, and so he wanted to make China an industrial power. Question 6. What were three negative outcomes of the Great Leap Forward that led to widespread famine? Number 5. I forgot number 5. How did China change under the Great Leap Forward program? Well, you had many peasants that left the fields and went to work in factories, and thus you had cities grow rapidly. Question 6. What were three negative outcomes of the Great Leap Forward that led to widespread famine in China? They had poor planning, they had the natural disasters, and because more people working in factories and fewer working in farms, you had a drop in food production, and that led to widespread famine. Question 7. What are two ways in which the Cultural Revolution in China in the late 1960s hurt China? Well, they took intellectuals such as doctors and teachers away from those jobs, and they had them work on farms. So you're having what's called a brain drain by having people that their skill sets were not being used to the best effect. Secondly, you also had students that were taken away from schools and sent to the countryside to work. So you had this huge brain drain of people being told you're going to do manual labor and you're not going to use your brain to do these other things that might lead to more intellectual things happening in China. But that was done on purpose. Question 8, why did Mao implement this Cultural Revolution in the 1960s? He did not want people questioning his form of government. That's what happens when you have a type of government like China's or like Russia's today, where they don't want people questioning the government, and so they try to get rid of the people, the thinkers of their country. If you remove thinking, then people won't question or criticize your government. Taiwan, on the other hand, pursued a goal of, quote, one China, two parts of one nation moving toward reunification. Taiwan wanted the mainland communist government to negotiate with Taiwan as an equal, but communist leaders said no. At first, the Taiwanese government limited the freedom of its people. By 1970, however, Taiwan's leaders had instituted democratic reform and developed an economy based on capitalism. Prosperity transformed the island into an economic powerhouse. Question number 9. What did Taiwan have as a goal in regards to mainland China? They wanted to eventually become one China again. They wanted to reunify, come back together as one country. However, the communists on mainland China had no interest in that. Question 10. Eventually, how did Taiwan take a different approach to their success than mainland China's approach? They basically, after 1970, they decided, you know what, we're going to put in democracy and we're going to have an economy based on capitalism, not the communism that's going on in mainland China. And they were very prosperous. By comparison, China's communist government was stagnant. After Mao's death in 1976, though, Chinese leaders started to open China to the West. Economic reforms helped China become a rising global power, as you can see on the line graph to the right. Chinese leaders gradually allowed a market economy to develop alongside the communist economy by letting people own businesses and sell products and services freely. Question 11. In the mid-1970s, how was China's economy differing from Taiwan's economy? It was stagnant. It wasn't growing. It didn't have the same pop that the capitalist economy did in Taiwan. So they decided to make some changes. And that happened after question 12. After Mao's death in 1976, what 3 steps did China take to improve their economy? Number 1, the first step they took was they let their leaders, the leaders allowed a market economy to develop alongside the communist economy. So they started to open up a market economy. Number 2, they let people own their own businesses. And number 3, they let people sell their own products and services freely. A divided Korea. After World War II ended, Korea was divided into 2 countries, South Korea and North Korea. South Korea was supported by the United States, and Communist North Korea had strong ties to China and to the Soviet Union, a powerful communist country that stretched across Northern Europe and Asia. Both Koreas claimed the entire peninsula. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. United Nations forces and the United States rushed to support South Korea, and China helped North Korea. The Korean War ended in 1953 without a peace treaty or victory for either side. A buffer zone called the Demilitarized Zone, sometimes with the acronym DMZ, was established to separate the 2 countries. Question number 13. What happened to Korea after World War II? It was divided into 2 countries, North Korea and South Korea. Question 14. Which major superpower supported South Korea? The United States. Question 15. Which 2 major countries supported North Korea? China and the Soviet Union. That is most of what we call Russia today, but the Soviet Union was not just Russia, it was also these other areas like Ukraine, for example. But back then, it was a country called the Soviet Union. Question 16. What did North Korea do in 1950? It invaded South Korea. Question 17. Which 2 forces supported South Korea? You had the United States and the United Nations, which was a group of countries around the world to try to promote peace and stability and democracy in the world. Well, in many cases, democracy. Question number 19. How did the Korean War end in 1953? It ended without a peace treaty or victory for either side. It was kind of, in many ways, called a tie. Question number 20. What was the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ? That was, as you can see in this picture here, that was a buffer zone set up to separate the 2 countries. They weren't supposed to have any military in there. That's why it's called demilitarized. You're not supposed to have any military. That's to allow both sides to feel like the other side's not at their border looking to fight. Stark differences developed between the 2 Koreas after the war. Over several decades, South Korea followed the path of capitalism, and the country's economy began to grow rapidly. In contrast, North Korea's economy, which is strictly controlled by its communist government, has struggled. North Koreans face many hardships because most resources go to the military. And you can see this pictograph over here showing a variety of ways in which South Korea is vastly superior to North Korea. I mean, just look at each of these things, whether you want to look at life expectancy, whether you want to look at how much access to the internet they have. I mean, look at that. Less than 0.1% of people in North Korea have access to the internet. Look at the infant mortality rates. I mean, just everywhere across the board, you see way more benefits to live in South Korea than in North Korea. There's a very good life lesson there to be had. Question 21. After the Korean War, what became 2 major differences between North Korea and South Korea? Well, South Korea went with the path of capitalism, and their economy grew rapidly. On the flip side, you had North Korea's economy, which was controlled by the communist government, and it struggled, and a lot of their resources go to pay for the military. Question 22. Why do the North Korean people suffer many hardships? Because they live under basically a dictatorship, communist government, and instead of helping the people with money for things like the internet, things like that, North Korea spends a lot of their money on the military. Modern Japan. After being defeated by the United States and its allies in World War II, Japan was stripped of its overseas territories and military might. The country adopted a democratic constitution, and women and workers gained more rights. During the Korean War, the United States needed Japanese factories to provide supplies for its war effort. Japanese shipbuilders, manufacturers, and electronics industries benefited from giving this assistance. Question number 21. After the Korean War, Question 23. What three Western ideas were put in place in Japan after their defeat in World War II? They adopted a democratic constitution. Secondly, women gained more rights. And 3, workers gained more rights. Question 24. How did the Korean War benefit Japan? Well, the United States needed supplies to fight that war, and Japan was more than willing to make those things in their factories. And so shipbuilders, manufacturers, and electronics industries benefited from us needing to purchase and use those things in the Korean War. The Japanese government... Oh, wait, did I do 25? Yeah, 25. How did Japan become a leader in the production of ships, cars, cameras, computers, and other technologies? Well, in this area, they did that. Actually, it's on this slide. Let's go ahead and do this slide. The Japanese government worked closely with businesses to plan the country's economic growth. Both invested in research and development of electronics products for their home. A highly skilled workforce and the latest technology helped Japan develop its industries. Within a few decades, the Japanese were leading producers of, here we go, ships, cars, cameras, and computers. By the 1990s, world demand for Japanese-made goods had turned it into a global economic power. Despite some economic up and downs in the 2000s, Japan's economy remains one of the world's strongest. Based on gross national product, Japan ranks 3rd in the world, trailing only the United States and China. And so we are going to look at question 25 here. How did Japan become a leader in the production of ships, cars, cameras, computers, and other technologies? Well, their government worked closely with business to plan, this is our way to the future. Since we were torn down in World War II, we're going to rebuild with a new economy, and we're going to focus on the things that people in the 20th and 21st centuries are going to want. Things like electronics, technology, things like that. Question 26. What does the term gross domestic product mean? Well, GDP is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. And so when we look at GDP from Japan, notice in 2024, China number 1, America 2, India 3, and there's Japan at 4. And you can see basically just how impressive China's rise has been. In 1992, they were down here. Notice by 2008, they'd climbed to 3. Japan was 2. And then finally, China's up to number 1. We're here at 2. You've got India at 3, which is crazy because India wasn't even in the top 10 prior to 2024. Like 2008, they weren't even in the top 10. So India, huge boost to their GDP. And there's Japan sitting at number 4. So these are the GDP powers of the world. And Japan is one of those. Well, thank you so much for watching. Before we go, I have this for you. Made in China stickers are made in Korea. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.